All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most frustrating, frankly mind-boggling scenarios we've seen in modern motorsport. We are heading back to the 2026 Hungarian Grand Prix. Now look, in Formula One, we all know championships are won and lost in the absolute smallest of margins, right? But the margin that cost a seven-time world champion a critical result in Budapest, well, it wasn't a second, it wasn't even a tenth of a second on the track. It was this, 0.1. A 0.1 kilometer per hour infraction. I mean, just think about the sheer absurdity of that number for a second. We are quite literally talking about a microscopic twitch of a finger on a steering wheel's pit limiter button. That tiny, almost immeasurable fraction completely altered Lewis Hamilton's weekend and, as you can imagine, set off a massive debate down in the paddock.
So, let's really break down this microscopic margin and look at the strict letter of the law versus the harsh reality of racing.
On one side, you have the absolute undisputed rule, an 80.0 km per hour pit lane speed limit. And then you have Lewis Hamilton's recorded entry speed, which clocked in at exactly 80.1 kilometers per hour. That juxtaposition is just staggering. It's a microscopic difference between a perfectly legal pit entry and a race-ruining infraction. But to really figure out why Hamilton was pushing that line so incredibly close in the first place, we actually have to zoom out a bit.
Because to understand the penalty, we have to look at the sheer chaos and the domino effect of the preceding laps.
Let's walk through the timeline, because it was a mess. The race initially kicked off with some McLaren drama when Oscar Piastri snatched the lead from pole sitter Lando Norris. But then on lap 38, Piastri ends up colliding with Carlos Sainz Williams while trying to lap him. Fast forward to lap 56, and the damage from that collision finally catches up. Piastri is forced to retire with a gearbox failure. And that specific retirement, that is what triggered everything that followed for Hamilton, who, by the way, was running very comfortably in P2 at the time. Piastri bowing out prompted Ferrari's strategy team to make this panicked, absolute last-second pit call for Lewis.
Now, Piastri's retirement triggered a virtual safety car, or VSC. As we know, this means drivers are strictly required to reduce their speed on track, which instantly creates these highly volatile strategic windows. In this case, Ferrari made the call for soft tires just as Hamilton was already approaching the pit entrance. He had absolutely zero time to get on the radio and debate his strategy team on what was, arguably, a completely unnecessary call. He just had to react, dive into the pits under insane pressure, and smash that limiter button. But before we even get to the penalty itself, there is this fascinating underlying layer to all this chaos, that initial collision on lap 38 that triggered this entire sequence. It was actually blamed on a systemic failure of the FIA's own automated blue flag marshalling system. So, ironically, the very governing body handing down these strict penalties was experiencing its own massive technological failures on the track that directly led to these chaotic race conditions in the first place.
But of course, the rulebook doesn't really care about context, does it? Let's look at the cold, hard facts.
If we look straight at FIA Document 57, it's pretty cut and dry. Driver, Lewis Hamilton. Regulation, Article B1.6.3a III. The limit was 80, the speed clocked was 80.1, and the penalty? A strict 5 seconds. Analysts did note that Hamilton appeared to engage the limiter right on the line as he entered the pits under those frantic VSC conditions. But hey, the sensors tripped. The rulebook does not care if you're frazzled by a late strategy call. The article dictates a definitive punishment for a breach, even one as vanishingly small as 0.1 kilometers per hour.
Now, contrast those sterile, black and white facts with the pure, raw emotion inside the cockpit. When that 5-second penalty came down, Hamilton was livid. Over the radio to his engineer, Carlo Santi, he vented, saying, "Every opportunity that I give those stewards, every single time they give me a penalty." You can just feel the sheer frustration pouring out of him there. But to really understand why he reacted so strongly, we need to look at the broader context of his season.
And that brings us to the massive, championship-altering fallout of this tiny infraction.
You see, this wasn't just an isolated incident for Lewis. This was actually his fourth penalty in just 3 race weekends. He had an incident at Silverstone, he had another one at Spa, and earlier in this very same Budapest weekend, he was handed a 3-place grid drop for impeding Piastri in qualifying. When you string all of these together, you can easily see why the frustration just boiled over on the radio. To him, it felt like this relentless, never-ending streak of disciplinary actions. And the immediate impact on the race? Incredibly painful.
Because of that 5-second addition to his race time, Hamilton was demoted from 4th place on the road down to 5th in the final classification. He finished a mere 0.7 seconds behind his own teammate, Charles Leclerc. Hamilton was very vocal after the race, directly blaming Ferrari's wrong call to pit him in the first place. He noted his tires were totally fine and that the unnecessary stops simply opened the door for this exact kind of penalty to happen.
But the real mathematical devastation of that 0.1 km/h error, it's summed up right here in this number, 50. That is now his points deficit to championship leader Kimi Antonelli. Because he dropped those crucial points, falling from 4th to 5th, the gap widened to exactly 50 points. That is a massive mountain to climb in a championship fight, and to think it all stemmed from the absolute tiniest of margins in the pit lane.
So, looking at the overarching administrative chaos of the race, what is the final verdict here?
Well, to truly capture the paddock drama that weekend, you just have to look at this incredible quote from Mercedes boss Toto Wolff. So while Lando Norris was busy celebrating a dominant victory, which was his first as reigning world champion, by the way, Wolff was absolutely scathing about that chaotic marshalling system failure we talked about earlier. He actually called rival engineers absolute Teletubbies for failing to manage blue flag traffic. It perfectly highlights the incredible tension in the air and the feeling that the race was just slipping into administrative chaos all around them.
Yet, despite all of that chaos, the consensus on Hamilton's penalty remains pretty firm. As Martin Brundle noted, technically the penalty is absolutely correct. Yes, it feels incredibly harsh, but the rules provide zero buffer, and honestly, that strictness is entirely necessary. We all know if you give Formula One teams an inch, they will literally take a mile. A definitive zero buffer line is the only way to maintain fairness and prevent teams from gaming the system during those incredibly tight pit cycles.
Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative thought. In a sport where championships are decided by fractions of a second, and, in this case, fractions of a kilometer per hour, is the rulebook simply too unforgiving? The 2026 Hungarian Grand Prix proved that absolutely nobody, not even a 7-time world champion, is immune to the rigorous, unbending nature of the regulations. It's a brutal reality of modern racing, but you know what? It's exactly what makes this sport so endlessly fascinating to analyze. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it gave you a much clearer picture of the chaos that went down in Budapest.